Today's lesson is on the rise of Sumer. We're continuing our study of Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent. So we are in Chapter 3, Lesson 2. The big idea for today is the Sumerians developed the first civilization in Mesopotamia, and there are two main ideas. The Sumerians created the world's first advanced society, and religion played an important role in Sumerian society. There's a brain pop activity that you'll need to log in and complete. So the Sumerians created the world's first advanced society. They created basic political units that they called city-states. You can remember that today because we have cities in our states. So they called them city-states. They had strong armies, and they built walled cities for protection. The city-states consisted of a city and all of the countryside surrounding it. The amount of countryside in each city-state depended on its military strength. And they fought each other to gain more farmland. Because remember, up until they started forming civilizations, they were hunter-gatherers, and they were nomads and traveled around. So when agriculture was established, they can now stay in one place. So farmland was very important to them because they had to feed their people. And different city-states would gain and lose power over time. It was kind of like a tug of war. So here is an example of one of the city-states of Ur, which would have been in ancient Mesopotamia. And you can tell that it's pretty well planned out. Even have their own harbor here to allow ships or boats, not really ships, but boats to come and go as far as trade is concerned. If you remember, the two important rivers in Mesopotamia were the Euphrates and the Tigris. The city of Ur was located on the Euphrates River near the Persian Gulf. Ur carried on a rich trade with merchants from distant lands like India. And this would be an example of the city of Mur around 2000 BC, or BCE, the new way of saying it. Alright, so Sargon, King Sargon. He was an Akkadian ruler who had the first permanent army that we know about. He eventually defeated all of the city-states of Sumer. And when his army conquered northern Mesopotamia, remember Mesopotamia was divided into north and south, King Sargon established the world's first empire. So King Sargon is pretty important. An empire is basically land with different territories and peoples under a single rule. Sargon ruled for about 50 years, and after his death, his empire lasted only a century longer. And a century would be for 100 years. So you may think that's a really long time, but it's not. All of this in purple, and including yellow, which would be Sumer, would be all of Sargon's empire in the year 2330 BC. And according to a legend, a gardener found a baby floating in a basket on the river, raised him as his own child. This baby later became the Akkadian Emperor Sargon. So that's kind of a little background into King Sargon. Religion. You cannot talk about history and ancient civilizations without discussing religion, because it was a major role in their society. They practiced the religion of polytheism, which is the worship of many gods. Monotheism is the worship of one God, and we will talk about that when we get to Judaism. But Sumerians practiced polytheism, many gods, and their gods they felt like had enormous powers. The priest had great statues built in Sumer, and of course the priests were the people who performed the religious ceremonies. Sumer had a social order. It's called a social hierarchy. And this is the division of society by either rank or class. So it went in order from most important to least important, supposedly. You had the kings at the top, because they claimed to be chosen to rule by the gods. So they didn't just happen there. They said they were chosen by the gods to rule. So kings at the top, right below them were the priests, because they talked to the gods. Then you had the skilled craftspeople, merchants, and traders. The largest class would have been the working class of farmers and laborers, because you've got to feed your people. And then on the bottom you would have slaves. Pretty much every society that we're going to talk about either had slaves or were slaves. Archaeologists think that this statue is from the 700s BC, and it represents Gilgamesh. You're going to watch an animated video of the story of Gilgamesh, which will be this. Once I'm finished with the lesson, you will come back and watch that video. And it's quite an interesting story. It's supposedly the oldest story that we know of. Like an epic. So the men and women in Sumer. As we go throughout the different parts, we'll talk about what roles men and women played. In Sumer, the men generally held the political power, so they're the ones that made the laws. And the women typically stayed home. They took care of the home and children. Education was generally reserved for the men, but there were some upper class women who were also educated. Some of the women were even priestesses in Sumerian temples. And don't laugh at how I pronounce something, it's probably wrong. Enheduanna was a priestess who wrote hymns, and she is the first known female writer in history. So this concludes lesson 2 on Sumer. Don't forget to go back and watch the videos. And next time we will pick up with Sumerian achievements.